Good evening, afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Visiting Writers Series hosted by IU East's Creative Writing Program. We want to thank the School of Humanities and Social Sciences and IU East's Mindful Explorations for their generosity in funding this event. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Joni Tevis, a writer whose creative nonfiction essays epitomize her connections to the world around her. From the wandering mysteries of Sarah Winchester's mansion, through the world of rock and roll legends, the wonders of glassmaking, the cave of the apocalypse, and the frights of the atomic age, Tevis unravels the puzzles of our time to remind us of the chaos of beauty and fear we confront in this modern world. Through the power of her lyrical writing, she invites us to digest her experiences wrought with signature poetic fierceness. It is not enough to simply read her work. We must simmer in her concoctions to reach the depths of her insight. Tevis's essays have been published in some of the country's finest creative writing publications, such as the Georgia Review, the Southern Review, Orion, Oxford American, and Poets and Writers. Her essay, What the Body Knows, won a Pushcart Prize. Currently, she teaches at Furman University as the Bennett E. Geer Professor of English. She will read from her latest essay collection, The World is on Fire, Scrap, Treasure, and Songs of the Apocalypse. This will be followed by a Q&A. We'll just open that up at the end. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Joni Tevis to our virtual stage. So welcome, Joni.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for that. That was a beautiful intro. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Like I say, it's such a busy time of semester. It means so much to me that you would take time out from your afternoon and spend it with me. So thank you. I appreciate that gift. So I was feeling moved today to read to you guys a little bit from my textile mill essay, Warp and Weft. So I thought we'll just read some parts of this. And if you've read it, great, it'll all make sense. If you haven't, just don't worry about it. Understand that it's a braided thing and we're just going to kind of follow where it meanders. And I should say, I'm coming to you live from Greenville, South Carolina, here in the upstate, right at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, like I say. And this is an area that really used to be known for its textile manufacture. And that's no more, as you'll see in the essay. But that just gives you a little context for where I'm coming from, literally. Warp and Weft. Tell me a story you know by heart. All anybody could talk about that summer was the rain. Tomatoes split, whole beans molded, muskmelons turned to rot. Roadbeds gullied and the jockey lot washed out. Boughs exploded off oak trees. Mountainslides slid down slope in a crush of mud. The sign at the Baptist church said, "Whoever's praying for rain, please stop." And the song I couldn't shake was When the Levee Breaks. Memphis Minnie Douglas and her husband, Kansas Joe, wrote it about the devastating 1927 flood that killed nearly 300 people and wiped out tens of thousands of acres in the Mississippi Delta. Refugees from inundated towns waited in tent cities above another bigger levee while they figured out their next move. Thousands of them left the Delta forever, setting off for cities like Chicago and what became known as the Great Migration. The version of the song that most people know is Led Zeppelin's. And the classic rock stations around here played it plenty that summer. John Bonham's drum line, fleshy, thumping, heavy as a millstone, sounds like dread made physical, and yet somehow it's tempting. It catches your ear and you sidle over, lean against it. Down on the river's edge, weeds grow in the clay. Surely there's no harm in letting your toes play in the water, in the bodied current, thick with silt. Little tunnel, dark as a culvert, I crawled inside on hands and knees until I reached the middle of the smokestack and could stand. Cool walls around me, circle of sky high above. Steel rungs mortared into the brick ran to the top. It would have been somebody's job to climb the ladder now and then and check on things. I knew I shouldn't be there. It was a muggy July morning, 23 years after the mill closed for good. Thickets of blackberry canes fortified the fence, and scribbles of green creeper fluttered against the walls. The overall effect was that of a castle left to rack and ruin, while its inhabitants slept off a potent curse. I jumped the fence with my husband David and my friend Brad. I've known Brad since we were kids, a time when hundreds of people, our classmates' parents, made their living here. But over time, cheaper imports flooded the market, and this mill went the way of most upstate factories. A scab-dark work glove, swollen with rubber warts, lay bloated in the weeds. 150 feet tall, made from clay very like the stuff beneath our feet, the stack was visible for miles, and like all these old stacks, it had little trees growing from its top. Standing inside, I was at the center of something and felt it. Behind me, the cleaning tunnel. In front, a dark mouth leading to the boiler. Something in me said, leave. It's dangerous to treat with the past, and you can't stay as long as you'd like. The place smelled deliciously of cool earth, but there was no ash left in the pit, only brick powder, crushed flat beer cans, and a dirty sign reading, keep out. Why do the mills pull me? I never worked in one, didn't grow up on the mill hill. I moved here with my family when I was small and left at 18 for college in another state. I didn't expect to move back. There weren't jobs. Over the next dozen or so years, I lived and worked in 6 other states. When finally I landed, I ended up just down the road from where I'd started. It seemed there was something important to understand about that, about here. Boosters used to call this part of South Carolina the textile capital of the world, and it wasn't idle talk. You could sleep all night on our sheets and in the morning wash your face with our ring-spun cotton. Drink your coffee at a table spread with Dacron, slice sausage loose from local stockinette, press a shirt pieced here with an iron powered by woven cotton electrical cording. These mills made twill and sateen, t-shirts and cardigans and lace and fiberfill. They made the diaphanous curtains with which Christo fenced the hills of Northern California. They made spacesuits and parachutes for the Apollo astronauts. Braid, yarn, greasecloth, carpet, webbing, florist wire, fiberglass. To keep a child's idle hands from the devil's business, you could buy a bag stuffed with the loops of many colored stocking remnants. We had a hand loom on which you stretched the loops over little teeth, warp, and a steel hook with which you could pull a second loop over and under, weft, and make a pot holder. But by the time I started high school just down the hill, the mill had shut down and somehow I missed it. Brad and I were in the marching band together, and when we played our home games, our music would have bounced off these very walls. Yet in my memories of those Friday nights, where the mill ought to be, there's blank space. If you could get a better perspective, say by climbing the rungs hidden inside the smokestack, here's what you would see. The roof's wide expanse, dimpled with stale rain. Cracker box houses in neat rows. The funeral home. The Hotel Easley, now condemned. The railroad tracks gleaming in the morning sun. If you stood at the top of that stack, high above the ground, leaves would brush your face from the little sumac trees that grow in the rim's worn down clay. Of the sumac, my field guide says, a dear child has many names. Sumac, sumac, shumac, shoemake. The stack was once the life of the mill, breathing out black smoke. Cold now as a copperhead's mouth. What does it mean to lose who you are? In the fall, sumac blazes red and orange. You can use its wood to make picture frames, napkin rings, or darners, or you can boil its leaves to make black ink, with which you can write all this down to help you remember. All right, skip ahead a little bit. On Led Zeppelin 4, Page, Jones, Bonham, and Plant share the songwriting credit with Memphis Minnie. And Jimmy Page produced it in 1971. But for all the special effects in the song, playing the harmonica echoes slightly before the actual melody, slowing down the replay for a sludgy effect, panning the instrumentals around Plant's howl so everything swirls around him, the most powerful trick might also be the simplest. They set up Bonham's drums at the bottom of a staircase. The drums sound prehistoric, but the kit was fresh from the factory. It's not just the heads, plastic, and the sticks, hickory, that you hear. It's the building, the tall, narrow space that you could, by some lights, think of as a tower. The microphone is your ear, listening from high above to the roar and pound from below. Of Levy, Jimmy Page said, "It sucks you into the source." Said John Bonham, "I yell out when I'm playing. I yell like a bear to give it a boost." In the pauses between notes, the beat presses itself against your body like water. You can't touch bottom, but you know if you could, deadfall branches would snag your ankles. Said Bonham, "I like it to be like a thunderstorm." That rainy summer turned into a glorious fall, and because this is a small town, I discovered that the current mill owners, whose property I had, yes, trespassed upon, were good friends with my supervisor at work. Unaware of my sin, they invited me to tour the mill, which they planned to turn into apartments and had gotten listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The mill owner took a key from its hiding place and unlocked the front door. When we stepped over the threshold, the temperature dropped, and we blinked in the sudden darkness. The windows were bricked up, the doors covered with plywood. The looms had been auctioned off long before, but when I played my flashlight across the floor, I saw the square bolt heads that had anchored them. The boards underneath were lighter than the aisles, which had been darkened by the tread of countless feet. As the owner explained how the apartments would be arranged, I thought instead of how crowded it must have been. Girls pushing carts down the narrow alleys and replacing full bobbins with empties, the machines thunder and clack. High above us were the pipes that had sprayed mist to keep the cotton mellow, and dead light bulbs draped with old lint. In the office, a giveaway calendar clung to the wall, a full year with no pages torn out, January 1990. I'd almost expected to find that, but not the skein of plastic garland from the last Christmas party, nor the memo on the lunchroom floor detailing the exit interview procedure for those employees whose jobs will end today. The newel post on the staircase was raised in the middle like a blister, its paint polished away by thousands of palms. We headed upstairs, where a training room held an old draper loom. I showed my flashlight over it. The beam lit up a circle of threads, both filling and warp. It had been someone's job to wind the thread in taut, parallel lines around the teeth of the beam. I loved drawing in, one skilled pattern maker said in an interview I read. I enjoyed it more than anything I've done. Honest to goodness, I'd rather draw in than eat when I was hungry, she said. The only thing I ever done in my life that I really loved. I'd seen an old photograph of a loom fixer seated in front of a frame like this. In his right hand, he held a crescent wrench, and his left hand bore no wedding band, maybe because of the tight spaces in which he had to work. A ring could get caught in the machinery, and then he'd lose the finger. She must have known he didn't love her the less. I imagine the lights flickering and the workers diving under the machines. When the power surges, the looms get out of whack, and the arm throws the heavy shuttle hard across the weave room. I see the man fix the loom, and the weavers get back to work, cotton sheeting with a figured pattern of striped blue and red around the edge. The shuttles fly back and forth, and the cloth grows, and when the roll is full, the doffer razors it free, runs it downstairs to ship. And the sheets stretch tight over beds sick or marital or childbirth. Cut in pieces, they shroud okra and tomatoes in the garden and catch the pump water where the housewife shakes the vegetables dry. Stitched in a line, they make curtains and bloomers and pillowcases. Quilted in layers, they diaper infants. Torn in strips, they bandage the hurting. The banner on the truck that rolled down Main Street in the 1919 Armistice Parade read, "We made bandage cloth for the boys who broke the Hindenburg Line." Rafters and floors of yellow pine, red brick walls, iron machines enameled green. Shuttles dark and quills pale poplar. Cotton so white after bleaching, and fat coils of roving going narrow as they seam through the needle's eye. One worker said of the old days, "You suck the thread into the eye of the shuttle with your mouth." Workaday kiss. We walked the floor together, moving slowly through the darkness like people floating in deep water. My flashlight picked up dim forms and shapes, broken pallets, a barrel of bobbins. Like the divers at the bottom of nearby Lake Jocassee, who swim past the porch of the old summer lodge, 200 feet down, or the cemetery, its gravestones' pale teeth looming in the murk. When we turned to leave, we passed an open door scrawled with spray paint. "Turn back," it said, "you're next." The trouble with creating a song that depends so heavily on production is that it's almost impossible to recreate live. After a few attempts in early tours, Zeppelin abandoned the effort. So the version of Levy I listened to must always be a relic. 7 minutes and 8 seconds snatched from the past. All right, we'll skip ahead a little bit. Say the names. Platt-Sackle-Lowell made textile machinery and replacement parts. In 1979, it employed 1,527 workers. It was raised 3 years ago to make way for a new Walmart supercenter. American Spinning made synthetic fabrics. In 1979, it employed 479 workers. Today, it's used for storage. A Tweaker extreme energy bottle flattened on the cracked parking lot. Poe Mill burned to the ground, and now skateboarders slide and jump off the wrecked foundations. Union Bleachery dyed cotton and synthetics. It employed 487 workers. It burned in 2003 and is listed as a Superfund site because of chromium contamination. Woodside Mill, once the largest textile mill under one roof in the world, made polyester rayon and polyester cotton fabrics and employed 1,150 workers. Today it's abandoned. Its bricked up windows covered with vinyl to make it look like they still have glass. It fooled me. "Hey," yelled the kids getting off the school bus as I stood there on the curb, staring at the quiet building. Hey. When I left home, I didn't want to go, but told myself if I came back, it would be because I chose to, not because I had to. In every other town I've lived, I've reckoned distance by how many miles drive it was back to here. I see a boy weep as he wraps his dead dog in a terry cloth towel. I see a daughter fold a washcloth with ice and apply it to her mother's forehead to break a fever. I see a woman unroll a stocking over one foot, then the other, and secure them at the top with stays. I see knitted socks balled on the floor beside a bed. I see a woman pull a day dress over her head, clip on her earrings, and set about her marketing. I see a woman fill a pillowcase with cotton batting and stitch shut the end. At the hospital, a man lays his head down and will not raise it again in this life, but has this comfort at the end. I see a man doff the lax bolt and box it for shipping. After his shift is over, he comes back and strips the remnant to take to his wife. The concrete holding the fence post cures in a few days, longer if it rains. I see the maintenance crew staple the chain link into place, stretch barbed wire over the top. I see the man take the slack out of the chain, tuck in the ends, and snap on a lock. Icy Norman spent her whole life working at a southern textile mill. I read her story in an oral history. After she retired, she said, "When I come out of that mill, I know that I'd done the very best that I could." Somewhere along the way, I felt a peaceable mind. When the mills closed, one owner had the machines cut into pieces so that nobody could steal his technology from the scrapyard. Workers had to take photographs of the torches cutting the frames apart. Another owner sold the machines to salvage dealers who picked them clean for parts. I like thinking about the salvage warehouses, dim hangars lined with shelves and bins full of cotter pins and drivetrains, motors and rotors and spinners and travelers, little staples you clip onto bobbins of ring-spun cotton. Smell of old grease and electricity and tang of rust. Hard lumps of steel waiting their turn. I know the dyes colored the river blue on Tuesdays and red on Wednesdays. That the waterfall downtown sudsed and bubbled. That the riverbed silt is still poisoned. That, as a monograph published in 1933 put it, there has never, in the history of the industry, been a protracted period when workers could not be replaced fairly readily with people anxious to get jobs. That the mill hired young, and plenty of kids, even kids I knew, quit school for that reason. But I also know it was about more than the cloth. Yes, it could kill you. Fires, accidents. I read about women scalped by speeder frames, a man caught in a belt that bashed his brains out on the ceiling. Lint-filled lungs, clatter-dulled ears, hands splayed, backs broke. Work takes your life, one shift at a time, and what choice do we have? Honest wages for honest labor, but you might as well acknowledge the cost. Restore its dignity. A former supervisor at Riverdale Mill in Spartanburg described the day he had to tell his workers that the mill was going to close. I started calling their names, he said, saying, "You've been here this many years, you've been here this many years, and you know we did a good job. You've done it. You have bought us this much more time we would not have had. You've got 60 days, and we're going to do this 60 days just like we've done it for the last 100 years. We're not going to do it one bit different. When we go out of here, we're going to hold our heads high." I see you, man who painted the sign that reads, "No admittance." Brushstrokes still clear after all this time, laid on steel you'd coated with primer to stay the rust. Nailed to bricks made of clay that some other man had poured into forms, sent through a kiln, and let cure in the sun. Sun that even now licks the rainwater off the gleaming weeds. You could make something here, a life that would last. No wonder I felt a shiver, standing in the stack, inside a thing that telescopes from past into future. You could stand on the top rung, both in the clouds and hemmed in by red clay. This could be the seat of life, or a hold gaping open to an underground cave. A man who watched Union Bleachery burn told me the dyes painted the smoke clouds brilliant blue, green, pink, dark rainbow, sign that appeared only to him, and just that once. And I'll stop there. Thank you, friends. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I could listen to you read all day.
Oh, thank you.
So, again, I appreciate everyone being patient with us while we dealt with a Facebook Live glitch, is what I'll call it.
Snafu!
Right. So I will open up the floor to questions. We've got some students here, so some out of the class that read your book. Actually, maybe all of them, because I've taught your book 2 years in a row.
Thank you.
So questions, and then I'll ask students first for questions.
Mm-hmm. I love answering all questions. Maybe I should check the chat first, in case there are questions. No, there are no questions in the chat.
If you don't want to come on camera, you can post your question in the chat.
You sure could.
Well, I have a question. Could I ask one while maybe students are being shy and or posting in the chat?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Joni, for that reading. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting up with all the glitchy stuff.
Happy to.
Well, for specifically for our students who are here, could you talk about you handle this form really wonderfully, which is the braided essay, or I guess in this case, it's the braided chapter. Could you talk about the kind of challenges that you find yourself overcoming or having to overcome when you're kind of like braiding together or weaving together all of these different modes of writing, like observational description and history and descriptions of work and meditation and all these other modes that you're working in?
Oh, yeah. What a good question. What a good question. So I love the braided form because it always gives me a way out of a tight spot. So, and that was absolutely the case with this essay. I had tried for years to write about the textile mills, and, I would go and do a little bit of this illicit, let's say, research, some hands-on research, which of course I don't recommend to anybody. We don't trespass. We would never actually do that in real life. So I would go and I would take these notes and try to write about it, and just nothing was happening. I'm reading all these oral histories to get a larger picture of it. And I finally even found someone to interview to talk about the mills. It was helpful. So I had all this other material, but it just was kind of, nothing was happening. There was no life there. I was trying to, make it come alive like Frankenstein's monster, and nothing was happening. But then this is the moral of the story. Drive around your Crown Victoria listening to Rock 101, the upstate's home of classic rock, because when I heard that song, when the levee breaks, I thought, wait a minute, this might be like the key to all mysteries. Let's just see if we could write about that too, and how could that kind of energize the material that I had. So in a real practical way, what this looks like when I'm writing is I get taken by something. I want to write about it. I write as much as I can. I have all this material. And then I look back and see what I have. Well, where are nodes for research that I've given myself without realizing it? And that's when I go and get those oral histories, or go talk to someone, or go to the archive, or even read some good kind of general interest books to get a larger sense of what's happening. But then the catalyst, you don't know what that's going to be until you do know what that's going to be. For me, it was the Led Zeppelin song this time, but of course, a lot of times you'll try different catalysts and they just don't work. So I end up always writing a lot more than I can ever use, but that is okay. That is okay. So I'll write about the other thing if I get stuck on the first line of thought, if I feel like I've exhausted myself on that. Yeah.
I've got a question that kind of is a follow-up maybe. Was the title of that piece Warp and Weft? Was that the title?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that title because, of course, it refers to the threads going one way and going the other way, right? So the title itself embraces sort of that braided form that you're using.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about your research? I was struck by how I don't know anything about the mills at that time, but to me, it felt very accurate. So can you talk a little bit about how you go about research?
Oh, yeah. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm so glad that you asked. So I try to take a by any means necessary approach. So if there's something that I'm interested in, like I say, I'll sit down and write as much as I can about it to kind of see more where my interest lies. And then the beautiful thing about researching today is that if you get one good book, then you can track back to that person's sources. Dear scholars who are taking classes, I hope that you're listening, as I did not know this back when I was a baby Tevis and wish I did. If you have that one good source, you can track back and see that person's sources, and you can get your Library of Congress subject heading, and that's gold. So then I'll kind of trace out more. And I like just going to the library and kind of browsing in the area of where a book I found to be useful lives. So, I mean, you kind of can't put a price tag on that of like, what is the thing that's going to trigger me, that's going to feel exciting and energizing? Even if I don't find it on the computer, I'll just go and browse the stacks and find it. And then I'm really into this idea of doing something with the idea of writing about it. So like Barbara Ehrenreich does with Nickel and Dimed, or like Ted Conover does really beautifully. I've been on a Ted Conover kick lately. And sometimes it can be as kind of low investment, low stakes as like driving somewhere and taking a little tour somewhere. That can be really useful. You could even put an interview under the immersive category, I think. But then I've had other longer experiences that I've written about. Like I was a park ranger in a previous life, and living in these different parks gave me a lot of details that I could write about. In my first book, I did that. I got a summer job at a cemetery and wrote about that. This I would not recommend, I wouldn't recommend it even to myself as a baby Tevis, but I think going somewhere and doing something with that idea, I'm going to write about this, is exciting. It's energizing for me, and it gives details I couldn't get any other way. So some of it, to recap, some of it is more traditional library research, and then tracing back the kind of research threads that this first writer has found and seeing what else I can find. Some of it will be interviews, and some of it will be doing something with the idea of expanding what I know. Okay, got this great question. Biblical or ultimate meanings, due to mentioning the apocalypse, the great flood, trespass, sins, or would you like us to think of the lack of meaning or randomness in disasters of various kinds? This is an excellent question. Thank you, Laverne. Thank you. I mean, I would say that because of my upbringing, I know the Bible, and many of the stories that I see in my own life, I had interpreted them that way because those are the stories that I've always known. So some of it is that I don't see these as having any, I don't see my conclusions as having the universal significance of some of that or ultimate significance, but it's more like these are the frames through which I often see things. So that's been useful for me. And also, it's a way for me to understand my own life and try to put it in terms that hopefully other people can use. Good question. Very good question. I like those as a shaping device too. The shape of a previous story. What a gift that can be. Anything to get myself out of a jam. We can talk more about shape too, if you would like. You guys want to talk about shape?
Yeah, if there's no, I have a question for you, but we can talk about anything.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, since there's students here and students will look at this later, one of the things that students, creative writing students often, it's sort of like explaining themselves away relative to their revision process. They read this, very polished work, right? You mentioned in your craft lecture, it took 7 years to get this book together. And in a creative writing course, and you teach, so I know you understand this, they get a short window to draft, get feedback, do a revision. So, and in your book, even in your when you're writing about the Winchester house, you write this one line. The question sticks in my, was she crazy? The question sticks in my craw, right? What can you call that level of revision but obsessive? So I'm just wondering if you would give us some ideas about your revision process and maybe some advice for these younger writers in our group and some of us older writers who are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I feel that every day. I was working on an essay yesterday that it occurred to me, I've been trying to make some sense of this material for 20 years. And so there's kind of this push and pull for me between, okay, I want to revise it till I feel this feels true to me. This feels shapely. This is the best way I could say it. There's nothing here that doesn't need to be here. It has energy for me. It is alive. On the other hand, I can revise something too much, I think, and kind of revise all the life out of it. And at a certain point, the perfect is the enemy of the good. I was telling myself that yesterday. I said, Joni, perfect is the enemy of the good, So, and like with the Winchester piece, I had the luxury of time. I was teaching less that term and had access to these amazing libraries. So I spent an academic year working on that piece, which was like almost 100 pages long. And I thought it was going to be my next book, but you can see that it's really more like 18. I had to cut it down that far. So I always say revision, it's not cleaning up after the party. It is the party. And it is a real rager. I mean, I love it. It's a really good party. And sometimes I like to give myself as kind of a way in, an artificial parameter that will help me. So I said this to myself yesterday with this piece I've been struggling with so long. I said, okay, what if your piece really was due tomorrow? Like all my students had their work due today. What would you do? Try to get it as close to being finished as you can. That was helpful. That got me out of a stuck place. Sometimes when I'm giving students revision exercises, I will have them write, let's say 5 or 6 pages, and then, this is mean, but it's a means to an end. Okay, you got 5 or 6 pages. Great. Now I want you to cut that story down to 750 words, not 751, people. 750. Now that's just wicked. That's just so mean. But if you can make yourself do it, then you can see what really is most important and what you really want to be there. And then give yourself another 250 and knock it out to 1,000, and maybe you'll like it. I mean, it all does kind of feel haphazard to me. Like, let's just try all these different things until we hit on some method that works. But sometimes time is a factor, and we have to come to at least a resting place, even if it's not the final stopping place for the piece. I think I talked in the craft lecture about the reverse outline, where you write as much as you can, then you go back with your other piece of paper and you say, okay, this paragraph is about this, with like 1 or 2 words. Paragraph 2 is about Y, and then kind of see what you've got. That's always helpful for me. I do that all the time, especially when I'm tired at the end of a writing day and can't do more. That does feel like a useful exercise, even if mechanical. Yeah.
I really loved your reverse outline, starting at the end and going back.
Yeah. Good.
Other questions?
Question in the chat.
Okay, let's see. Let me scroll on up. Oh yes, these things that will live on after us. Yeah, I think that is an excellent question. So I think everyone can see this. These kind of relics that get left behind. I've always been fascinated by these things that get left and that we leave. When I was little, I thought I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I kind of feel like I am now. Yeah, Denise knows. Yeah. So I'm always trying to read these fragments that I find and to kind of draw attention to them. So I think Scott, you're probably onto something there with that question. These things that will outlive us is something I've always been fascinated with. And I didn't set out to write about them, but the obsession will always bubble up.
I just want to comment that was something that I noticed in your reading. Some of your images, many of your images actually were like the afterglow of something that had been there. Maybe afterglow isn't the right word,
Yeah.
but the residue of something that had been there. I think when you were in the factory and the bolts that were still on the floor, or the shapes that were still there. And you had another image about the glove bloated in the weeds. That was quite lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, I am fascinated by this. Like, we all end up leaving all these things behind, whether we want to or not. And I'm kind of a pack rat, so I can't stop thinking about these things and kind of turning them over in my hands. And always useful for a place to get started with writing too. Just describe an object that has the energy. I always come back to that when I'm stuck.
I enjoyed your reading. I don't really have a question, but as a sociologist and an interactionist, I love the way you contrasted the cultural and regional identity that came with being the textile capital, right? With the realities and the downsides, the cracked hands, the colored water, all of these, the black smoke.
Yeah.
So that's woven together nicely. And I think that oftentimes we romanticize those things that are central to our regional or cultural identity. And so they would romanticize that we used to be this, we used to have this, and totally ignore the rest.
Right.
And so you bring that rest back into our focus by weaving these together. And I can't get When the Levee Breaks Out of my head, and I'm right there with John Bonham. Although I could never do drums like he did, but I'm right there with you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, there is always a cost to it. And you guys, I even have this shuttle right here in my office. I want to show. Look at this. So, the part where sometimes it would come off rhythm, you can see how this would be very dangerous. It's heavy. You can tell it's tipped with this metal. It has a real polish to it. And a lot of times this was dogwood because it's a very hard wood. So it doesn't splinter. It just gets polished. But you can see where this would be a dangerous thing if it came flying across the factory floor. I just had to share that.
Used to be an antique dealer. Seen many of those.
Yeah.
Questions.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, actually.
Yay.
It's Samantha.
Yay.
Ooh.
Samantha is here.
You.
Yay.
Okay, so as a new creative nonfiction writer, I've come into it since starting IUE, and one of my struggles has been, and I'm curious on your process in creative nonfiction writing. One of my issues is, while I can write academically very well, I can do, proposals, research papers, whatever you need from me. And I see in your writing, in your book, you weave together so well, like historical context, research, memory, and you do it in a way that isn't like commentary. It's not like we're writing a research paper. Mm-hmm. And I was just curious on your process for managing that balance of, this isn't a research paper, but it's informative. It's, it has texture.
Yeah. What a good question. What a good question. So for me, a lot of it comes down to imagining a listener. And I want to tell that person the story that I have as clearly and directly and with as much like passion as I can. And sometimes I will even imagine that reader. The reader may be a real life person or maybe the ideal person. Here's what the reader is for me. This is someone who loves me so much, who's going to listen like rapt, everything I say, like, wow, that's so cool. Who, like, even when I go on and on, is like, amazing, So sometimes that is really what I need. And that helps me get it all down, And then when I read it aloud, I don't want to make that person bored, I want to keep the person's interest. Like, I've got you here. I'm so glad you're here. Let me seduce you and let's all like read together and hear this story until like we've taken it to its conclusion. So that is my number one advice, imagining a listener and then reading it aloud, because then your ear will know. The ear knows things that the eye doesn't. I always hear things when I read it aloud that I would miss otherwise. So for me, that helps. I'm always trying to woo that reader and keep the reader there in the room with me.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. What a good question. What a good question.
I am blessed with great students.
You are.
Other questions from the floor? We'll probably take a couple more since we started late. So yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I mean, I'll have another question for you when you're ready. Mm-hmm. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
So one of the things that I noticed this in your reading, because I can't help but notice it, and students when they were writing about your book, one of the things that they were tasked with is looking for the lyricism, right? Mm-hmm. Like, please go in here and find it. And a lot of students wrote about repetitive phrases.
Yeah.
Phrases, right? And you also had quite a bit of that. I see, right? So, but that is always a tricky thing to do, to know about how to do the repetitions, when to do them, what they mean. So could you, and you do this, a lot, and this happens in poetic form. So can you talk a little bit about how you make those decisions about repetitions?
Yeah, what a good question. So for me, a lot of it does come back to ear. I was trained as a musician. I thought that was going to be my work in life, and I've moved away from that. But I always want to get music into the sentences themselves. So I think about someone like Whitman. You read Whitman aloud, and you can feel the power of what he's saying with those lists that kind of build and build. Absolutely. The anaphora, that's right. And the power that has, and the repetition and the variation. So I'm always kind of sitting at the feet of folks like that, and reading it aloud is the way for me to really get there. But I do think that the ear, for me, there's no substitute for the ear. And I will try to spool it out, sometimes maybe longer than I should, but then you have a good editor who can say, Joni, sometimes too much of a good thing is wonderful, and sometimes it isn't. Yeah. Yeah, I would say ear. And then I wanted to say real quick, one quick thing about shape. So if people are wanting to try something new here at the beginning of the summer, I love the idea of shape as a way to move through material if you don't have the luxury of plot or narrative. So you can take the shape of a song you like, maybe it's intro, verse, chorus, second verse, bridge, chorus till the end, and you can kind of write an essay that's built along those lines and use that as your shape. I love that kind of thing. For me, that opened up writing in a way that nothing else had.
Wonderful, wonderful. Any other questions?
You guys, there was one question that I didn't answer from the sheet that you gave me before that I wanted to touch on today. And someone had asked about writing things that are so personal and help you to focus on a specific event rather than looking at it as a whole. And I wanted to talk about giving ourselves the permission to write what we most need to write, and trust that is important work to do, and to be kind to ourselves while we do it. And that might mean writing in a place where you are safe. It might mean having, some good hot beverages nearby, and even a friend next door, whatever that means for you. Give yourself whatever you need to help yourself get through it. If there are hard things in your past you need to write about, give yourself permission to do that in a way that feels safe and also productive for you. I wanted to give that advice.
I think too, you have to kind of get to a place in your life.
That's
where
right.
you write about something.
Exactly.
And that doesn't necessarily happen in your 20s
No.
or your 30s or even your 40s sometimes.
That's right. That's right. Truth.
And it is an issue for students because, in traditional age, they're writing about something that may have happened 2 months ago. And so it's a cautionary tale. Make sure that you have enough distance, you can compartmentalize it.
And you can write it just for yourself too.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think how you write about it in your 20s is going to be very different than how you write it.
Right. And you can write it just for yourself. I mean, there were some hard things I wrote about in The World Is on Fire that I started with the comfortable fiction that it was just for me. I'm just going to write this for myself. And that gave me the freedom to do it. And then, you start to shape it. And then the old art making mind kicks in. You think, well, okay, so we got that down. But now that we've got it down, what if we braided in this other stuff? Let's just see what happens. And for me, that was really useful. But I could not have got there if I had not, given myself that useful out that it's only for me. And I could have made that choice that it was just for me. That would have been okay too.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, I so appreciate everyone showing up in
Me
this.
too.
It's kind of like it's emblematic of the fire we had last week in Richmond. It was just, it's been chaos.
Yeah,
Joni, I so appreciate you taking time with us today.
me too. Glad to.
Reading your work. I mean, this is a wonderful book. The
Thank you.
students enjoyed it. I taught it last spring. So, it was one of the favorite books in the group that they read. Yeah. So they just wrote on and on and on about it. And it was appealing to the students in the class who are, tend to be very confident with research papers, because you gave them a way to think about this.
Good.
I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to unmute, and we can give applause.
Thank you, friends. Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you. And there's no greater gift that one writer can give to another than to share class time. And I know it's very, very precious, and that you would share your class time with my work 2 years. Melissa, that just means so much to me. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's such a busy time. I really appreciate you dwelling with me. Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.